Director of Strategic Engagement for Natural Resources Defense Council, an environmental advocacy group with more than 3 million supporters nationwide. And we welcome our pastor, David. So, would you like to pray?
Let's pray together. Loving God, on this day that you have made, on a beautiful day outside, we give thanks for the creation that we are part of, that you include us in the opportunity and challenge of caring for that creation. And for Bob Deans and his ministry in the public sector, his ministries through this church, we give you thanks, and for his willingness to share thoughts and time and wisdom with us today, both those gathered in this room and those connected through the Spirit and technology. We are grateful. Bless Bob and his family and all of us here, that we may grow in wisdom and an appreciation of you and your love for this amazing world. In Christ we pray. Amen.
Thank you, David.
Welcome.
It's a great week to be talking about stewardship. We started out with the spectacular eclipse earlier this week, and my wife and I went down to the river that afternoon and saw the partial eclipse and just experienced the forest getting quiet and the river, and it's just a nice moment. You go out this morning, the dogwoods are blooming. It's just a spectacular time of the year for this. And of course, tomorrow, Caitlin Clark will go the first choice to the WNBA. Speaking of spectacular Astro events. So a lot going on. And just wanted to start out with just a completely random metaphor for where we are with the climate fight. We've begun to slow a big ship down, but it is still moving steadily through the darkness, straight for the bridge. And unless we act a lot more aggressively than we have and a lot more urgently, that bridge will go full patch decline and fall to pieces. So we're making a lot of progress, but we're not where we need to go. And I thought to myself about asking you all, do you want the good news or the bad news first? And then I realized we're all Presbyterians, so let's just get right down to the good news. So we'll put the good news on hold. There is good news, and we'll close with that. But to start with, I drove here in a car that puts 20 pounds of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere for every gallon of gasoline I burn. Now, it doesn't matter what car we drive, when we burn a gallon of gasoline, it puts 20 pounds of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's chemistry. And people say to me, well, how's that possible? A gallon of gasoline only weighs 6 pounds. How can you burn that and put 20 pounds of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? That too is chemistry, as it turns out. Gasoline is carbon and hydrogen, right? C8H18 is gasoline. 8 atoms of carbon and 18 atoms of hydrogen. And when you burn it, the oxygen mixes. So you get each atom of carbon links up to 2 atoms of oxygen. So you get CO2, which is 4 times as heavy as carbon by itself. And that's how come you get 20 pounds of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. I say this simply to make a point that a lot of what we think about with climate change is common sense, but not all of it is. But some of it is. And it's common sense when you stop and think about it. Imagine fuels that have taken 20, 60, 80, 100 million years to form in the ground, being ignited in the geologic blink of an eye. And that's what we've done. Imagine that since 1990, in the past 34 years, we have burned more coal, oil, and gas globally than in all of history up to then. It's an astounding thought, but it's true. just since 1990, and we can all remember, I'm looking at this room, most of us can remember 1990. Since then, we have burned more coal, oil, and gas globally than in all of history before that. And what we have done is we've increased the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere by 20% just in 30 years. And as a result of that, the atmosphere is now holding 50% more heat than it did just 34 years ago. Again, some of this is chemistry, but that's how the chemistry works. So we see the consequences all around us. We just finished, as everybody knows, the hottest year since global record keeping began in 1880. About 1.5 degrees centigrade, about 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit above pre-industrial levels, where we were before we started cooking the planet with all this fossil fuels. What does it mean? Well, we know in this country, last summer, 2/3 of the country was exposed to dangerous heat waves. 2/3 of the country. We know that drought dropped the Mississippi River to its lowest level ever recorded. We know that across Canada, wildfires burned enough land to cover the state of Oklahoma and sent smoke so far south that it blotted out the sun over the United States Capitol. We know that right now today, 45 million children across Africa have been driven to the brink of starvation or are fighting cholera due to a combination of successive years of epic drought, followed now this year by torrential flooding. All of this amped up by what's happening with the climate. And finally, you look around, the Gulf Stream is slowing down. Colorado River is drying up. The Great Barrier Reef is dying. So these are the very real consequences we're dealing with. And it's a very grim story to tell on such a splendid Sunday morning in April. But the good news is we're making enormous progress. We have in the past 3 years, under the current president, hit what I call a climate grand slam of climate action, built on 4 pillars, if you will. First is something called the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed in August of 2022. A weird name for the strongest climate law ever passed. That, as we all know, was a concession to a senator from West Virginia who was not going to sign a climate bill, but was happy to sign an inflation reduction bill. But that Inflation Reduction Act has $370 billion worth of incentives for climate and clean energy action over the coming decade. And here's what's happened just since then. It has spawned a heartland manufacturing renaissance with clean energy at its core. So just since that bill was enacted less than 2 years ago, we've seen more than $120 billion in corporate investment to build new factories to make solar panels, wind turbines, electric vehicles, and advanced batteries all across the country. More than 100,000 jobs in red states and blue. In fact, the Wall Street Journal reports that more than 70% of this investment is actually going to red states. So this is apolitical progress, if you will. Creating jobs, driving investment, driving innovation, strengthening the domestic supply chain for the building blocks of a clean economy. Really important. And making us more energy secure by helping us to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels that pad the war chest of belligerent petrostates like Russia. That's important. So that's number one. Number two, last December, the administration put in place methane rules to cut the methane pollution. Methane is a greenhouse gas, a climate super polluter, if you will. It's much worse for the climate than carbon dioxide as an agent of global warming. So we're going to be reducing the methane leaks that come primarily from the oil and gas industry. Production of oil and gas, as well as pipeline distribution. Third, we're reducing the carbon emissions from our tailpipes, from our cars, pickup trucks, heavy trucks, through some new EPA standards that are going to reduce that pollution by 56% by around 2032 for new cars starting model year 2027. That's going to eliminate or prevent 7 billion tons of carbon pollution over the next 3 decades. In perspective, that's more than we produce economy-wide in a year. So that's important. And not this week, but next week, the administration is going to put out a new rule that will end, finally, unlimited carbon pollution from our power plants. And this rule is going to limit carbon pollution from coal-fired power plants and from new plants that come online that burn natural gas. Now, what about those existing gas plants? That's a problem, because 50% of the carbon footprint of the power industry is coming from existing gas plants. They will not be covered by this. That was a decision the administration made. We think they will come back if they have the opportunity to and deal with that at a later time. That's imperative that it happen. But when you put these 4 things together, the Inflation Reduction Act, methane rules, cleaning up our cars, trucks, and dirty power plants, we've positioned the country to cut its carbon, its total greenhouse gas emissions 42% below 2005 levels by 2030. Now, if you remember, the president pledged to cut those emissions 50 to 52% by 2030. So 42% kind of puts us within striking distance. With greater ambition at the federal, state, and local level, and at the corporate level, we can get there. We can get where we need to be. This is really important. Now, the president's opponents call this a war on American energy. It's important to note that American energy is thriving like never before. Not only the clean energy sector, 2/3 of all our new power plants last year were wind and solar. 2/3 of all the new generating capacity in this country came from wind and sun. That's important. We're now getting about 14% of our power nationally from the wind and the sun. We've got to increase that, and we're on track to do it. But meanwhile, what's happened to oil and gas? On Biden's watch, U.S. domestic oil production is up 17%. To a record level. Never before has this country or any other country in the world produced as much oil as the United States produces now. On Biden's watch, natural gas production is up 10%. No country in the history of the world has ever produced as much natural gas as we're producing now. And on Biden's watch, exports of liquefied natural gas have increased 30%. We are now the world's largest exporter of liquefied natural gas. No country in the history of the world has done any of that. So when people talk about, when people talk about a war on American energy, only people waging a war on American energy are the people who have been trying for the past year to gut these incentives I've been talking about earlier that are driving this clean energy progress that we're making. So it's important to bear that in mind. Now, I want to talk about 2 more things. Actually, I'm pretty much ready to get to y'all's questions, but I do want to mention 2 more things that have happened of late. 2 days ago, you may have read in the paper that the administration raised the royalty rate for what we charge for oil and gas production on federal public lands. Of course, the oil and gas industry got all up in arms about that. Oh, you're killing us. You're gonna drive up, pump prices for the consumer. So a couple of points about that. The royalty rate, the rate that the taxpayers get compensated for oil and gas that comes off of public lands that we pay for has not been changed since 1920. It's been stuck at around 12%. So that got raised for the first time in more than a century to 16 point something percent. The estimates are that it's going to raise about $150 million a year. Put that in perspective. Last year, 3 oil companies alone, ExxonMobil, Chevron, and Shell, made $86 billion in profits. We're talking about 150 million a year for this. So no reason to lose any sleep tonight over this royalty rate increase. The other thing the administration did, and you may have read about this, was in late January, the administration put a pause on the review of new terminals to export liquefied natural gas far into the future. Now, when this happened, the other party immediately said they've banned the export of gas. No, it's going to hurt our European allies. Nope. And it's part of a war on energy. No, none of that's true. And I believe the people who were saying it know it's not true, because I give them credit for understanding the difference. But you need to know that the pause the administration put on the review of new terminals has zero impact on our exports today. Those exports, as I told you, have risen 30% on Biden's watch. They're going to rise again this year, next year, and the year after that. They're going to double almost. They'll increase by 80% by 2027. And this pause will have nothing to do with that. It won't impact that at all. 70% of our LNG exports go to Europe, where they've been a lifeline in helping people and helping European countries sever their dependence on Russian gas. 70% we are the largest supplier of liquefied natural gas to Europe. Won't be affected at all. And as I told you, gas production in this country is up 10% since Biden took office, and it's continuing to rise. So you have to ask yourself sometimes, why would somebody say something? And they all said the exact same thing, and they all know that it's not true. And that's probably a conversation for another period, but it's important for people to know that. So I wanted to close, if I might, by reading a quote from the great theologian Reinhold Niebuhr, because I thought this quote was apropos for our conversation. Niebuhr wrote, "Nothing that is worth doing can be achieved in our lifetime. Therefore, we must be saved by hope. Nothing which is true or beautiful or good makes complete sense in any immediate context of history. Therefore, we must be saved by faith. Nothing we do, however virtuous, can be accomplished alone. Therefore, we must be saved by love." Reinhold Niebuhr. We're not going to fix in a decade or two a problem that has been decades, if not centuries, in the making. We've got to hang on to hope. We are not going to turn this ship around alone, no matter how hard we try. And this work isn't always going to make sense to everybody we talk to. We're going to need all the hope, all the faith, and all the love we can muster. That, and with the grace of God, we will prevail. So with that, I'll invite your questions and comments. Yes, sir.
I have a question about charging stations for electric vehicles. I understand that one of the things that's holding down the public demand for electric vehicles is charging stations. I don't know that is a solution that is important enough to talk about, but it does interest me how that impacts our our future for electric vehicles?
It's a great question. It is impacting the future. Just a little quick perspective. Electric vehicles last year were about 8% of all new cars sold were electric. This year, it's going to be 10%. That meant last year, 1.2 million electric vehicles sold. That does include hybrid. This is all electric. So people are buying them, but as you said, what's called range anxiety. I don't want my battery to go dead when I'm sailing down I-95, you know, somewhere south of Lumberton. And so, you know, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that was passed included $7 billion to produce or to build 500,000 charging stations to help build this coast-to-coast network. In addition, General Motors, Ford, the big automakers are investing money in this. This is a temporary problem. It's going to be solved. The states have been allocated money to have these charging stations built. And so we're gonna see more and more of those. Right now, it's a problem. It's a temporary problem. Yes, sir.
Quick follow-up on that, I feel like the problem with charging, I currently drive a hybrid, the one that sort of charges when you brake, but I had rented an electric car for a cross-country trip last year, and it was really the charging time, and sometimes took 2 hours, 3 hours, and sometimes you gotta, you know, stand in line because there are 3 other cars, you know. Anyway, so I feel like that's also another big problem, but my question is, I think it's wonderful to see that the US emission and all that has gone down, and the share of, you know, solar and wind has gone up. But climate change is a global problem. And so with Western countries like the US and many in Europe, where growth and populations have stagnated, it kind of makes sense that emission would go down as technology, you know, gets better. But we're also talking about developing countries, places where populations are going down. And I know there are a lot of concerns also from our side about outsourcing carbon to those countries. So we're moving our emission from geographically here to somewhere else, and now it's their problem. And they're gonna cut those pollution, right? So I guess I know it's politically not sexy to give money out to other countries, but I guess what are your views on the responsibility of developed Western countries with regards to helping or ensuring that developing countries can still grow the way that we did, utilizing oil and gas, and also helping them to go towards cleaner energy?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one of the biggest challenges that we face for the very reason that you articulated. Our view is that countries like the United States and Europe and other developed countries have a huge responsibility to help vulnerable countries, vulnerable people protect themselves from the climate impacts that they're already experiencing and that are already baked into the system, and also helping them to transition to clean energy so they can be part of the fix. And so our view is that we have a huge responsibility, and here's why. The United States, European Union, Russia, and China, 4 entities, are responsible for 63% of the carbon pollution that has accumulated in the atmosphere up to now. If you look at climate vulnerable countries, the 10 most vulnerable countries, Pakistan, Haiti, Bangladesh, and 7 others, collectively, they're responsible for less than 1%. So this is global injustice. And so it's not charity for the United States and other countries to be providing money for these countries to help cope with the problem and help become part of the solution. It's not charity, it's justice. So we feel there's an important obligation there. Separately from that, there's the question of, we're not going to fix this without the developing world being a part of the solution. Because right now, if you look at where coal is the dirtiest fuel, coal is the biggest part of the problem right now. Power plants and transportation, that's something like 80% of the problem right there. China burns 60% of the coal that's burned in the world. China burns more coal than the rest of the world combined. India is still building coal plants. India is getting 80% of its electricity from coal. We're getting about 17% of ours. But we used to get a whole lot more than that. So, Vietnam, Indonesia, even South Korea, and Japan have recently built coal-fired power plants. That's what we're trying to, bring an end to in turn. But you can't tell a country like China that has 1.4 billion people and that is doing something that no country in the history of the world has done. It has moved hundreds of billions of people from abject poverty to the global middle class, and it's done it in the span of a single generation. That takes a lot of energy. And so, and as you pointed out, we have outsourced a lot of our manufacturing to China. And so you can't, on the one hand, say, we want you to develop, we want you to be part of the modern world, we want your people to rise above poverty, and we want you to help us, with build all of our smartphones and our blue jeans and everything else. And then say, and also, by the way, cut your carbon footprint. So China's investing more in clean energy than the rest of the world combined. And China is a leader in solar. It's a leader in wind. It's a leader in fast trains. It's the world's leader in electric vehicles. So it's leading all these great areas we want to be moving in. It's also the leader in dirty energy. And so this is what you've got. And it's a complicated situation. What we need to do is to provide the support that we can to the developing world, increase our cooperation with China. NRDC has an office in Beijing. We have about 35 people there. They're all Chinese nationals, and all except for one or two. And we work very hard to try to learn what we can from what China's doing, but also help them learn from what we've done with our advocacy in this country. But we need to increase our cooperation with China, and climate is an essential reason why. We cannot solve, there's not a single global issue we can solve, and certainly not a single global environmental issue we can solve unless China's part of the fix. So we're committed to that.
They have a significant advantage, though. They don't have political opposition to contend with.
There is that. I wouldn't say it's universally an advantage, but in certain things, in certain instances, you're right, Steve. Yeah.
Are you suggesting we need a strong man in government here?
No. Thanks for checking.
Yeah.
Let's see. Michael,
Yeah.
Michael Gibson has a question. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you. Wonderful presentation, Bob. I just had a strange question. It seems to me that I'm curious what the relationship is between electric vehicles and electricity generation. If we start reducing the amount of emissions from automobiles and trucks by switching over to electric powered vehicles, it seems to me it's going to put a much greater demand on the grid in order to supply that electricity. And that in turn means that we're going to presumably either do a lot more conservation or start building new electricity generation plants. Have you considered that, and what do you see the relationship between those things?
Sure, great question, and we have considered it. Our analysts tell us that we can make up for the additional power we need with wind and solar, combined with storage, battery storage. So obviously, the wind doesn't blow all the time, the sun doesn't shine all the time. So you need battery storage to help bridge the gap. Or some kind of storage, whether it's batteries, thermal storage, hydro storage, anything like, there are a lot of things being looked at. But we believe we can fill that gap. We believe the grid needs to be modernized and improved and strengthened to manage the additional load. And it is obviously important that the energy that we're using to power our cars is clean, so that we're not just simply using dirty energy to replace our gasoline cars. So that's all to the good. But the key to this, understanding the importance of this, are the efficiency gains. In my internal combustion engine car, if I put 10 gallons of gasoline in that car, who knows how many gallons are being wasted? 8 is the answer. If I put 10 gallons of gasoline in my car, under the best of all circumstances, 2 gallons are actually being used to move the car forward. Here's why. An internal combustion engine, a typical 6-cylinder engine has about 130, 140 moving parts. This is all metal on metal. It's an enormous amount of friction. The heat and the friction and the power that it takes just to move all that machinery takes about 65% of your gasoline. Add in the time that you're idling, you're sitting there, just the engine's running, you're in traffic, you're at a stoplight, you're at a stop sign, you're trying to find a place to park, comes to about 80% waste in an internal combustion engine. An electric car flips that equation, because when that car is sitting still, there's no electricity being used. It's like flipping off your light. And so when you apply power to your electric motor to move the car forward, it's much more efficient, about 80% efficiency. So it flips that equation. Those are huge, huge efficiency gains. And the second thing is, if you look at how we make electricity, whether it's through fossil fuels or even nuclear, it's much cheaper to make it now using wind and solar. And I'll give you an example. There are only two new nuclear reactors that have come online in the past 30 years in this country, and they're both in Georgia at Plant Vogtle. Plant Vogtle came online originally with 2 reactors about 30 years ago. Last year, they opened a new reactor, and this year, the second new reactor at Vogtle. So Vogtle will have 4 reactors. The last 2 reactors, to build them, cost $31 billion. It was more than double what the budget was. And it took more than twice as long to build it as they thought it would. Not because of, what people tell you, environmentalists or regulations, none of that. Most of it was because of pipe. In miles and miles of pipe. And then you build it and you find out, well, there's a flaw here, and now we got to go back and fix that. It's not easy, and it's expensive. In South Carolina, there was a nuclear power plant that was being built. They put something like $6 billion into it, maybe $8 billion, and walked away from it. Because they said, there's no way we're ever going to get this thing finished or paid for in a reasonable place. So the ratepayers of South Carolina are going to be hit, not for the full amount. Investors will take a bite, but ratepayers are going to be paying for that mistake for 30 years. But our people did the analysis on what could Georgia Power have gotten for that $31 billion if instead of 2 new nuclear plants, they had built using solar power. Now, a nuclear power plant runs 96% of the time. Solar power, about 26% of the time. We factored all that in. Once you factored it all in, we found that Georgia Power could have gotten 3 times as much power from solar power as it got from nuclear for the same amount of money. So dollar for dollar, that's a big difference. And that's on the ratepayers of Georgia. So that's the kind of thing that's important to remember on these electric grid
So
questions.
I was gonna make a follow-up. I've heard environmentalists, younger people in particular, promote nuclear energy because they say that solar and wind are not gonna meet all of our needs and that nuclear is cleaner than natural gas and oil and so forth. But those of us who remember 3 Mile Island or Chernobyl know the dangers of especially nuclear fission. And there's people who are working on nuclear fusion, but that's still so far in the future. I don't think, I agree with you. I don't think that going for nuclear fission, even revised plants, is a good way to go because, but you do hear some people in the environmental community saying, well, how are we going to power data centers and other big users of energy? So I guess
Yeah.
that's my question.
It's a good question. Well, a couple of quick things on it. Nuclear fusion, I wrote a magazine piece about nuclear fusion. And I remember the scientists were telling me it's about 20 years away. Well, that was 40 years ago. If you ask a scientist today, how are we doing on fusion? We're about 20 years away. We're going to be 20 years away on nuclear fusion in perpetuity. It's just a very hard thing to do.
Yeah.
So fission, what we have now, here are the issues. The first is it's got to be safe. Now, you mentioned Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island. We could add Fukushima.
Yes,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Fukushima was a pretty scary deal. And, you know, people say, well, that was a tsunami. Yeah, it was a tsunami, but the problem was that it shut down the power to cool the spent fuel that was sitting in pools. What do you think we do with our spent fuel in this country? It's sitting in pools.
Oh,
You know, we have yet to, 70 years on, we have yet to figure out a permanent repository for the waste from nuclear power plants. So we have about 104 nuclear reactors around the country, and every one of those produces spent fuel that sits in pools that has to be continuously cooled. So if you lose power at any of those places, what happened at Fukushima can happen here, because what happened there was eventually the building where the spent fuel was cooling in the pools, the roof blew off because they couldn't cool them anymore. The heat built up. That can happen in this country if a place loses power long enough. Now, all these places have backup power. I don't want you waking up in the middle of the night worrying that a roof is going to blow off of a nuclear power plant nearby. They've got backup systems and redundancy, and that's what you do. But that's an issue. The second issue is security. Without going into it, it's a security risk to have spent fuel sitting around at 100 different sites around the country. The third issue is sustainability. We haven't found a permanent repository for this spent fuel, so it is a problem waiting to happen. And the fourth thing is cost. We just went through some of the cost issues here. Wall Street's not writing checks for nuclear power plants. Dollar for dollar in getting power from wind and sun is your best bet right now. And the way we close that gap is through better storage. So we believe that's the answer. But and the data centers are a problem. And the data centers are something that I'm not sure anybody really reckoned with even 5 years ago. A data center, as you all know, is basically a large building that uses an enormous amount of electricity to run servers, to manage the cloud, to manage all the computing power that we're using now. Northern Virginia now has more data centers than any place in the world. The second nearest is an area outside Shanghai, China. And my son's been working on some of those data centers out there, and these are vast. He's running a lot of conduit and pulling a lot of electrical wire in these things. And so I'm not sure we had really calculated the enormous amount of power that's going to be used for these data centers. So that's an issue. But our analysts do tell me that we can make up the gap with wind and solar power and storage and building a modern, reliable grid. Yes, sir.
How important is deforestation in the problem?
It's really important because old growth trees hold a lot of carbon, and they take a lot of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and they bury it in good soil. Same as you know, a good agricultural area or good you know, wild field, wild prairies, mangroves, wetlands. They take a lot of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and bury it in the soil. When you destroy them, you destroy that capability. And so deforestation is a huge part of the problem.
Do we need deforestation to feed the nation, the world's population? In other words, you can take down the trees and you put in crops. Right? Is that an issue at all?
It's a huge issue. And it's something that we work on and something that we've been advocating for. And we've seen some progress at some of the global climate talks. Wasn't Dubai? Was it Glasgow? I believe it was Glasgow. The world came up with a deforestation convention that the United States and other nations have agreed to try and slow down deforestation. And there are two pieces to it. One, you want to stop the destruction of old forest, rainforest, but also forests like the boreal forest in Canada. You want to stop that destruction, but then you also want to restore the health of forests that have been degraded so that they can be restored to the order that you want, where they're actually working to reduce carbon dioxide. It's a big issue. Yes, Tim.
Going back to the new legislation during the Biden administration, historically, it seemed that national environmental policy was set by California using its market power. To what extent now has the federal government overtaken and is now setting it where it ought to be at a national level rather than California setting it?
It's a great question, Steve. And California still plays a leadership role, and there's still a lot of states that peg, for example, a lot of their air quality standards to what California is doing, which in a lot of areas is a higher standard than what we have been able to set nationally through the EPA. But the federal government is now finally stepped up in the past 3 years to play a major role in raising the bar nationally. And the great thing about it is it's creating so much opportunity, jobs, more than 100,000 jobs just in these new manufacturing. But it's important to remember that there are 3.3 million Americans who get up every day and work to help us make our homes, workplaces, and cars more efficient, help us get more clean power from the wind and sun, help build that new reliable grid that we've been talking about. That's a lot of workers, and that's growing rapidly. And so for the federal government to become part of the solution in some of the ways that we've been talking about is hugely important. And I don't think there's any going back on this, particularly when you think about the fact that, as I say, according to the Wall Street Journal, some 70% of this investment is going into red states. So there's a representative from Georgia named Marjorie Taylor Greene, and in her district has now become the largest producer of solar panels in the Western Hemisphere. And it's the direct result of some of this investment we've been talking about and massive expansion of solar panel production in her district.
Which she voted against.
She voted against it.
Yeah.
And every member of her party voted against it in the House and the Senate, every single one. But we're hoping that these jobs and investment and innovation will make a believer out of her.
How about incentives on the
We've
local?
we've talked today now about hope and faith and love, hope and faith and love.
How about incentives on the local level? I had have a friend who lives in a condo building in the district, or her husband's on the board, and he figured out that in fact they should be using solar panels. And in fact, it will reduce the monthly fees for the entire condo building. And every member of the board voted him down.
Oh, boy.
I mean, really, and I mean, and this is in a pretty progressive area.
Don't want to save money.
So, yeah,
Some
I
people
mean,
hate- hate
and look
saving
at what
money.
we've done here at Bradley Hills. But, and I go to France, and every little town has their solar farm where they've consolidated. People don't have to put the panels on their house because they they figured out how to use the farmland. It just seems like do we have a long way to go, locally
Yeah.
to try to?
There's a lot of potential for what you said. There's a lot we can do locally. There's a lot we can do at the state level. And frankly, the biggest thing we can do is at the corporate level. And asking corporations, this is part of your responsibility as a member of our community. We need to ask more of our corporations. Corporations need to be about more than just making a profit. There needs to be some greater purpose there. And if I might say so, a great nation needs to be about something more than $3 a gallon gasoline. So we are that, but that needs to be galvanized. That takes leadership. I'm grateful that we've had that leadership in the past 3 years. And it's not what this president came into office and found. What he found was a climate policy rent to ruin by a climate denier, a science denier, and a person whose fealty to fossil fuels is such that he would anchor us to the mistakes of the past. No great nation is stuck with bad habits that do more harm than good. And we're not stuck with these bad habits, and neither are our children. Yes, Elaine.
What's with all the coal in downtown Baltimore near the harbor? There are fields and fields and fields of coal. First, is it being mined in Maryland? And then the second thing I saw where the bridge, Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsed, that there was some comment about they needed to open the channel so that the coal could be shipped out. Where is it being shipped to? Is it being shipped to China?
We ship a lot of coal to China, and we ship a lot of coal to Europe, and we ship coal to Japan. Other places too, but primarily. And so that coal is being mined in Appalachia and coming by train to Baltimore and being shipped. So I would expect most of that coal in Baltimore is headed toward Europe, but I don't know
Have
for
you
a
ever
fact.
seen it, Bob?
I've seen it, and also,
I was
and
shocked.
I think the largest coal export facility in the world is in Norfolk. So in Norfolk, if you go there, you see a lot of coal too, if you like looking at coal.
That all comes down the CSX track that runs through Garrett Park and Kensington.
Is that right?
It does. Right. I've seen it because it goes through my
Mile-
neighborhood,
mile and a half
Kensington.
Yeah.
Yep.
No.
And, but that also speaks to the pipelines for natural
Yeah.
gas, liquefied natural gas. They were going to put one from West Virginia through Virginia in and link it into, I think to Norfolk. And then they were also going to put a liquefied natural gas facility near Calvert Cliffs in southern Maryland.
Mhm.
But I think that those were paused at the very least. I know that the local community didn't want a compression facility in Buckingham County, Virginia. And that was an issue of climate justice because it was a largely Black community that they were going to put that in. But there were people like the NRDC and Earth Justice and other organizations that really fought the coastal pipeline. I mean, it's just one thing, but then you see there's the Great Lakes, there's a lot of fuel that goes that way too. But I've heard that a lot of this just for export. It's just
Yeah.
the natural gas is not staying in the United States.
Yeah, LNG is strictly for exports. There is no liquefied natural gas of any real dimension used domestically.
Right.
And let me explain why and why it matters. To liquefy natural gas, you need to cool it to 260 degrees below zero. Now, let's talk about what that means. I've got a refrigerator at home that has a little 1/4 horsepower motor in it that cools about 12, 14, 16 cubic feet to about, 38 degrees. Okay. We export every day 14 billion cubic feet of gas that has been liquefied, meaning cooled to 260 degrees below zero. That's not a quarter horsepower motor. A plant that liquefies natural gas uses about 190,000 horsepower to run the compressors that are required to cool that gas. How much is 190,000 horsepower? I want you to imagine a row of Corvettes lined up bumper to bumper, a mile long, revving their engines at full throttle. That's 190,000 horsepower. And that's what that's the scale of order of magnitude we're talking about to cool natural gas, to liquefy it. Now, you don't do that for laughs. You do it because you can get liquefied natural gas on a ship, sail it to Europe, and make $200 million on one shipment of that gas. That's what's happening. Now, think about that in terms of sustainability. Think about the carbon footprint of cooling that gas, then putting it on a tanker, sailing around the world. Then it has to be regasified, has to be turned from a liquid back to a gas and sent in a pipeline to be used by a customer somewhere. And what's Europe using that gas for? Well, mostly it's heating and cooling, because they're not using it to make a lot of electricity with that gas. Meanwhile, Europe is rapidly moving to heat pumps. And so they're using less gas and more electricity. So Europe is committed to cutting its gas use dramatically, 30% by the end of this decade. Why would we be building more LNG facilities to lock us in? These facilities are built to last 30, 40 years, to lock us and our kids into decades more of this unsustainable use. So that's why President Biden said, hang on, we've already approved and are building LNG plants to almost double our capacity by 2027. We've approved plants that haven't begun construction that will triple our export of LNG by early next decade. And if we look at what the International Energy Association is telling us, if the world meets its climate commitments, demand for gas is going to go this way. Why do we want to lock ourselves into decades more of this? So the Biden administration said, time out. Let's put in place some guidelines so that we can assess these applications based on what's it going to mean for the climate? What's it going to mean for environmental justice? What's it going to mean for the cost domestically of gas? Because let's not forget, this is gas that's being produced in our country and it's being sent overseas. And so what's that going to do to our consumers? What's that going to do to our businesses? So it's a common sense thing to take this pause. And that's why they've done it.
Mm-hmm.
If I may, and it's also, I mean, it's just cracks good business too.
Yeah.
Because it's actually looking more than 3 rolling quarters ahead.
Right.
Yeah.
When supply and demand are going in opposite directions, that's not good for long-term profit. It may look good over the next 2 quarters,
Right.
or the next
Yeah.
3 quarters,
Mhm.
but 8 quarters from now,
Yeah.
not so much.
Well, it's a great point, John.
Mhm.
And we don't, you know, we ideologically, we don't have an industrial policy in this country like a country like China has. But this is an instance where we get our lunch eaten by a nation that looks long-term. China made its mind up a decade ago. Clean energy is the future. It's a strategic resource. We're going to invest in it as a nation. We finally got around to it 2 years ago. We're catching up.
Can I ask a follow-up question? I don't know how we are on time, but,
Yeah,
Yeah, 4 minutes.
getting close, but.
I recall back in the 80s, there being a number of innovative, small entrepreneurial companies in Maryland that were developing solar panel technology that quickly disappeared as some of the big oil companies bought up those patents and then shut the companies down. They basically bought them out, you shut them down. Is there a lingering ripple effect to that in terms of how that has slowed down our progress in this area?
You bet there
Or
is.
is anything, is anyone even talking about that?
Yeah, you bet there is. And listen, I remember when I was a kid, my dad worked for AT&T Telephone Company and Bell Labs. They owned Bell Labs, and I can remember the day he came home from the telephone company and he handed me this little thing and he said, "This is Bell Labs invented this. It's called a solar cell, and it turns sunlight into electricity." I was about 6 years old, 7 maybe.
Mhm.
And I remember looking at it and going, no. And Dad says crazy things all the time, you know? And, but somehow, so we had this, we had this 60 years ago.
Mhm.
And for reasons you said, I'm never going to demonize an industry that provides us with things that we need. I need gasoline, I don't think these are bad people, but boy, they are rapacious. They are relentless. They are powerful. And they are absolutely committed to producing and getting us to burn as much of this fuel as we possibly can, as quickly as possible, because they know the writing's on the wall. They see what happened. They saw in the early 90s when Kodak put its numbers up and said, we'll be selling more and more film forever. And guess what happened? And the oil and gas industry knows it's on borrowed time. They want to dig it up, set it on fire as fast as we possibly can, and they're committed to it. And it's brutal. It's not a game for them. It's a mission. And so, we got a lot of catch up to do.
Mhm.
Thank goodness we have finally started to do it. What we cannot do is turn the reins over to somebody who's going to take us in the opposite direction. We can't afford to do that right now. And I just got to say this, it's not a political conversation, but a lot of young people, my children's friends, he's not doing enough about climate. Well, guess what? The alternative isn't some almighty climate avenger who's going to be able to fix us with a wave of the hand. The alternative is a man who wants to take us back to Spindletop.
Correct. And thank you, Bob, for your talk. It was really, really good.
Thanks, everybody.
And,
Thanks for coming.
Thank you
It
enough.
helps us to understand where we are now. And again, thank you. For next week, we're going to have another environmental discussion. We're going to have a longtime Bradley Hills member, Clint Kelly, and he'll be providing details about saving the planet with resources from space and the environmental consequences associated with extraction and processing that will limit the transition to solar and wind from fossil fuels. But in the meantime, gathering electricity needed to reduce poverty in less developed economies and slow population growth. There's a place where the sun always shines and where base load energy can be taken and made available to raise the quality of life in less developed areas such as sub-Saharan Africa. So Clint Kelly will be providing exciting details.
An exciting program. Thank you, Bob. We can't thank you enough. And we've got some other exciting programs coming up and stay with us, folks. It's beautiful weather, but you can enjoy after you finish checking in with us.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Good to have you.
Right.
Yeah.
Great, I listened to most of it.
Great.